Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on Twitter at MMALOTN. This week we're going over a big UFC 260 card headlined by the baddest men on the planet. We got the heavyweight strap on the line with Stipe Miocic going out there and defending his belt for the second time against Francis Ngannou. If you guys remember, they were originally, or they first fought at UFC 220, and Stipe Miocic was able to weather the early storm of Francis Ngannou and take home a decision victory. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing how both guys have progressed and how this fight will go. Obviously, you guys will learn what I studied and how I'm breaking down this fight the further you listen into this podcast. So just want to put that out there. Just as always, let's get into the betting recap because it is always important for you to go through your last event to fulfill and withstand your transparency moving forward with all your viewers and all your watchers. And that's something that I always want to push to you guys is transparency. So last event, one of the better ones that we've had in the last little while, and it actually secures 3 straight winning events, and we're back into the green a little bit, but we still have a lot of work to do for 2021, but it's still good to go out there and cash a lock of the night and dog of the night play on the same card. So let's start off with the 2 losses first and foremost, which is at a 0.25 units to have on Marion Renault to win in round 3 against Miocic at plus 1600. You know I love my round props, have to take a little bit of a stab. That one whiffs. Also took 0.25 units at plus 360 for Renault to win inside the distance. That one whiffs as well. I'm completely okay with that. I had a firm stance on that fight. I felt like I was the right side, but it falls flat on its face, and I don't mind taking an L there, especially with taking shots in underdog when you feel like you have a good angle, and I felt like I had a really good angle in that fight. Props to Miocic for coming back from everything that she's endured over the last year or so, and she put on a very good performance, and she continues to progress as a bright prospect in this division. But give me the correct opponent and I will fade her again, especially if she's in this minus 250, minus 300 range once again. Let's go to our dog of the night play. We had 1 unit on Derek Brunson at plus 150. Goes out there and cashes for us pretty much exactly how we thought he would, which is takedown, 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 takedown. And Kevin Holland can't stop a takedown if it meant saving his life. And even better, it seemed like he didn't even give a fuck about being in there, which was really even worse. If you guys actually saw the clip from Khabib's live stream that he did of the main event, you hear Dana White after Derek Brunson completes a takedown with about a minute and a half left in the fight. He goes, I can't watch this anymore. And that's more so, I think, frustration with Kevin Holland's approach in that fight, which was just, I'm not going to do much. I'm going to try to land some strikes and try to mess you up on the feet. But if you take me down, I don't really have much off of my back. So, how much does his black belt really come into play? It's very sketchy. Derek Brunson was clearly slowing down, and that's not what I expected to happen. I expect Kevin Holland to be the one to be slowing down, but Derek Brunson started slowing down, but it looked like, he was still able to go out there, complete the takedowns, and that's all that matters. That cashes 1.5 units for us. The dog of the night play hits there. Then the lock of the night play. Originally, it was Gregor Gillespie. That fight falls out, I believe, fight day, and we quickly pivot to the under 2.5 in the Montel Jackson and Jesse Strader fight, and that looked like it was cashing pretty much in the first 10 or 15 seconds where we see these guys really start to throw it down pretty much immediately. So that's 4 units at minus 191. We cash for plus 2.09 units there, and all in all, we cash plus 3.09 units on the event for a 55% ROI. I'm happy with that. As long as I hit my lock of the night play, that's what I'm focused on the most. That's my main play. That's what you guys are here for. You guys are here to hear my best spot at the most reasonable prices, and I felt like I did that exactly. That's at least for the last 2 out of 3 events, right? The second last one, we had the no contest with Leon Edwards, obviously, but before that, we hit Sean Brady at 4 units at minus 196. We get the same thing here, 4 units at minus 191, and it hits for us. So we got 3 straight winning weeks. Very happy with the results. For those of you that follow, even though I'm down on the year, picks will now only be behind the Patreon wall until I hit my next losing event. So if you guys want to see what the pick is for this weekend, you guys are going to have to sign up to the Patreon. It's only $5 a month. It's a great way to support your boy. Again, I'm taking this thing full time starting this week. This Friday is my last day of work, and I can't wait to fucking take this thing full time so I can start providing you guys with Bellator, LFA, and even just more content and looking further down the road rather than just what's coming up in this current week. And that's what I'm looking forward to most, is getting ahead of schedule and getting these lines that might not be available once fight time or fight week approaches. And that's the benefits that the guys on the Patreon actually get and I can't wait to implement it. I'm very, very excited. So shout out to everybody on the Patreon. With that said, let's do the Patreon plug real quick. Again, all the perks are in the description below. You can see the link in the description below as well. We have a great Discord community. We get a best bets and props article that drops every Wednesday or Thursday of fight week. Early access to the breakdowns, and not to mention everything that I'm doing full time now. There's going to be a bunch more perks on there too. Not to mention the pay-per-view parlay for the Patreons. For the patrons, that's actually dropping this week as well, where all the patrons vote on their 4 best spots for the upcoming card. I put $50 on, or at least 5% of my Patreon take home, and if it hits, I send the winnings to a random winner for whoever helped vote for that parlay. So that's another great perk that I have on the Patreon. Shout out to the Patreon. You guys are amazing. We're at like 225 members right now. I'm going to keep that rolling, keep that moving. And as long as this win streak keeps going on for the Lock and Night plays, I know that community is going to continue to grow on a week-to-week basis, and that's my goal. And that's what I'm hoping to do. We're starting to shake the rust off a little bit. I'm down on the year still, but we're going to be making moves. And I feel very good about the momentum that I've been able to capture over the last couple weeks. Next up, Coolbet. Coolbet.com. Make sure you guys check them out. They are a great bookie, mainly out of Canada, some Southern American countries, as well as a bunch of countries over there in Scandinavia. But they are a great bookie. If you guys use promo code MMALOTN2, you guys will get a match bonus on your initial deposit up to $200. So 100% match you all the way up to $200. So you put in $200, they'll match you another $200. You have $400 to play with right off the bat. There is a 6 times rollover, but there's always a rollover no matter what website you're signing up with and no matter what bonus that you take. 6 times is normally on the lower side. I normally see like 10 to 15 time rollover. So this is a solid spot. So again, coolbet.com. Make sure you guys use promo code MMALOTN number 2, and it will give you guys that bonus. Again, it's 2, not the word 2, the number 2. And then also a shout out to Fanatics Fantasy MMA, a great fantasy MMA app where you're able to go out there and make your picks on this app and go up against your friends, go up against the leaderboard, whatever it is. It's a great way to showcase your picks. They have a very sleek and cool looking layout. Not only do they do UFC, they do ONE FC, they do Bellator, they do PFL, they do ACA, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. They do KSW as well. So it's a great app to really challenge your friends to like fantasy stuff. There's different approaches. You can take the Vegas odds, or you can take just a straight pick'em type of contest. I do have my own contest as well. If you guys check in the description below, you guys can join that contest, and you guys can go head to head with me as well and see how you do on a week-to-week basis. So once again, make sure you guys check out Fanatics Fantasy MMA. It's a wonderful app. They're still in their beta mode, and they're very engaging in terms of the customers, in terms of listening to other, listening to feedback and listening to things that they should take out, they should add, or they should change. They're very much in a developmental stage right now, but it's a very, very sleek app, and they're very responsive to whatever their clientele actually tells them. So make sure you guys check it out. It's a free app. Go check it out. The link is in the description below. It's a very, very fun app, and I hope to challenge you this weekend for UFC 260. All right. Let's get into the breakdowns. I don't want to waste your time any further. Again, I do want to remind you guys, I should have said it right off the top here, but there's going to be 2 versions of the podcast that comes out every week. We have this one that should drop every Monday of fight week starting in April. And then on Tuesdays, 8 p.m. Eastern, every Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern of fight week, you guys will have an MMA Lawcast live episode. That's an episode where you guys are able to get my picks. That's where I'm going to be doing pretty much the same breakdown that I'm doing for you guys right here, but obviously not as detailed as the ones that are in this podcast. This podcast is the ones where I do my research and then I record the breakdown right away, so everything's fresh in my mind. Whereas the live episodes that I'll be doing every Tuesday, it'll be a little bit more of a general breakdown, and I won't have as much in-depth knowledge or breakdown as I do in the podcast as you find in this podcast, I should say. So make sure you guys check out the Tuesday live streams as well. If you guys are free at 8 p.m. Eastern, that's where you guys can find the live stream. You guys can be lively in the chat. I always take the comments, questions, and comments, all of that into consideration, and I try to morph it into the live stream as well. It's a very fun show. I've done it 2 weeks in a row now. We've had a lot of fun on there. Make sure you guys check it out. 8 p.m. Eastern. That's the new home for you guys. Every Tuesday, 8 p.m. Eastern of fight week, MMA Lawcast Live. That's what we're doing. All right. No more jibber jabbering. Let's get into the podcast. Hope you guys enjoy the breakdowns. Make sure you guys like and subscribe if you haven't already. Enjoy the breakdowns, and let's make some money this weekend. Marc-Andre Barriault versus Azaitar. We got minus 130 on Barriault and plus 110 on Azaitar. Let's start off on the Barriault side of things, who righted his wrong in terms of 3 straight losses that he incurred when coming into the UFC against Andrew Sanchez, Krzysztof Jotko, and Jun Young Park. And then he did beat Oscar Piechota via TKO at the ending of that second round. Unfortunately, he gets popped by USADA, accepts the suspension, obviously, and comes back, unfortunately gets a no contest in his last fight. So he's really hoping to get his hand raised and actually get this victory to stick coming into this scrap against Abu. Now, Barriault is a guy that I've kind of been very familiar with for a long time. I used to watch him on the amateur scene when we used to go out, when I was with my gym up here in Toronto. We used to go over to Montreal, and the promotion that I used to fight for, he was one of the guys that was always on the fight card. And then he turned pro, started fighting for TKO, became a double champ, beat some of the guys from our gym as well, and he showed a lot of potential. Then he comes to the UFC and goes on a 3-fight skid. But with that said, 3 very tough fights. We're talking about Andrew Sanchez, who great grappler, and it truly came down to that third round where we saw Sanchez have a lot of success with grappling Barriault, slowing down the fight and pretty much controlling them for the majority of it and coming away with the decision victory. And then Jotko as well, great striker, held his distance well, had some good clinch positions as well too, and Barriault couldn't get his game going there. Even in the Jun Young Park fight, right? Park throws with a lot of heat, had some good wrestling success of his own, but it was Park that came out on the winning end there. But even in that fight and in the Piechota fight, we do see glimpses of solid things from Barriault, which is his pace. He really goes out there and just sticks in his opponent's face, just throwing strikes out there, not letting them breathe, not really giving them any space to get their own game going. And I think that's going to be very important here against a guy like Abu, who seems like he is almost too power reliant. And even if he goes out there and gets a couple takedowns, he's not the most devastating guy from on top either. I think that Barriault could truly, stuff whatever takedowns are coming his way from Abu, but I think he might even be the one that goes out there and goes for his own takedowns. Now, Barriault recently just went down to Sanford MMA, and it seems like he's getting very good training down there, not to mention obviously working with Henry Hooft himself, but he has a lot of good training partners that can truly get him ready for an opponent like this. He has great all-around game, right? He has great striking, great takedowns, solid top control, but it's really his pressure that sets him apart from the rest of his competition. And I feel like this is a great spot for him to go out there and really push the pressure and really start to gas and wear on the gas tank of Abu. Abu was 35 at this point in time, coming off a USADA suspension, and we haven't seen him in the cage for a long time now. I do want to pull up the last time we actually saw him in the cage, but we did see him go out there and lose to, he did beat Vitor Miranda, who mainly known as a kickboxer, is a brown belt in jiu-jitsu, but had some success of his own in that fight. Yeah, the last time we saw him was July of 2018. So we're coming up on 3 years since we've even seen him in the cage. He was scheduled a couple times against Alessio Di Chirico and Joaquin Buckley, but he was suspended by USADA at the time. It seems like he's going to be able to crack under the pressure here. And Barriault should really be able to put it on him. It seems like he was struggling a little bit with Miranda's style and even, getting taken down by him. But he did do a good job of kind of reversing those positions. Whereas I feel like Barriault will be much tougher to kind of reverse and get off of him. But I think it's truly going to come. The success for Barriault will come from the striking and the pressure that he's going to put on him from the get-go. I like the approach that Barriault brings to his game just because he just crowds his opponents and really doesn't let them get their game going. Obviously, he wasn't successful in doing it in his first 3 UFC fights, but Abu doesn't really strike me as a guy that has crazy knockout pressure, because that would obviously, really derail the pressure of Barriault. But Barriault is going to be putting strikes together, putting combinations together, mixing in some clinch work, a couple takedowns, and I think by mid-second round, we're going to see Abu really start to slow down. So I think that a third round finish could be possible here for Barriault, and that will be something that I'll be looking at. But I'll ultimately be taking him to win this fight via decision, as I do think that's his best path to victory here. Play this fight as safe as possible, continue to put the pressure on him, stay away from the big shots, get this fight to the ground as much as possible. And even if you aren't able to keep him down, the amount of energy this guy's going to continue to exert, one, trying to get back to his feet, and two, dealing with the pressure from on top, it's really going to start to gas him. And the fact that he hasn't been in the cage for as long as he has, I think it's really going to cause him some issues to get his game going. So I do like Barriault here. Kind of surprised that the line is as close as it is. I think you're getting some solid value even at this minus 130 spot. But I do think this is a great stylistic matchup for Barriault, and we'll see him go out there and actually get his first successful victory inside the cage. Hopefully he doesn't pop for anything after this, but he should get his hand race here. I'll say by third round TKO, but don't be surprised if Abu actually survives and we see this fight go to the judges' scorecards. But I will take Barriault to win this fight via pressure, via all-around MMA game, and the fact that Abu, in my opinion, is just not that great of a fighter. So I'll go with Barriault to win this fight via third round TKO. Omar Morales versus Shane Young. We got minus 185 on the Venezuelan, and we got plus 160 on Shane Young. Let's start off on the Omar Morales side, or at least the first note that I do want to get off the bat right away is the fact that this fight is still tentative. It did get canceled, per se, a couple days ago, right after Alexander Volkanovski actually was pulled from this card as well. But we are getting reports that this fight could potentially still happen. And I did want to get the breakdown of it because I feel very strongly on one side about it. So I do want to get the breakdown because I could potentially have a bet on this fight as well. So let's start off on the Omar Morales side, minus 185 favorite, coming off a loss to Giga Chikadze last time around where he was a minus 185 favorite. Similar situation, same odds, but we do get a much less threatening opponent in Shane Young for Omar Morales to go out there and potentially get a victory over. He did have two wins in the UFC before running into Giga Chikadze to succumb to his first loss. He goes to a decision with Dong Young Ma, and then also Gabriel Benitez in a fight that was very, very, very entertaining. Both guys swinging a lot of leather, a lot of guys, really throwing the best heat at each other, and there's a very good technical aspect to that fight with the southpaw approach of Gabriel Benitez, and then obviously the heavy striking acumen of one Omar Morales. Now, I feel like that's the toughest fight. Well, actually, the Giga Chikadze fight is obviously the toughest fight for Omar Morales, where a lot of people were overlooking the striking advantage that Giga actually had in that fight. Omar looks very intimidating with his big muscles and the amount of ferocity that he throws with. But if we actually looked at the fight a lot closer, Giga was the much better technical striker, and I'm not sure a lot of people really took that into consideration, myself included. I didn't bet Omar in that spot, but I didn't understand why there was a huge love for Omar in that spot, but I did not have as much confidence in Giga in that spot. So I do want to give a shout out to my guy Scott Shelvak, who I believe was the only guy on Giga in that fight, and it paid off for him. That plus 160 underdog was a really good spot given the striking differences that we had in that fight. Right off the bat, you see Giga Chikadze go out there and attack the lead calf of Omar, and it kind of just sets the tone for the fight, where you see Omar kind of whiffing on a lot of shots and Giga really landing the better shots, and then eventually taking over later in this fight, close to getting a 10-8 in that third round where he was able to drop him and nearly finish him. But Omar was really struggling with trying to get the range there and trying to get past the kicking game and the southpaw offering from one Giga Chikadze. But in the other fights, with the Benitez and Ma, and even the Park fight, which I was kind of surprised to see him coming into that fight as a plus 275 underdog, but he goes in there and rips up the lead leg of Park, and then eventually finishes him in the second round with Dong Yong Ma, just completely putting the pace on him, even taking top control whenever the situation presented itself. He did a good job controlling Ma and just landing enough damage to not get stood up, and then obviously grinding out those rounds. And then what Benitez just doing such good work on the feet, really just you could see the confidence just glowing off of him, especially with every kick that he was landing and every punch that he was landing clean as well. And then he just couldn't get it going in the Giga fight. Also in that fight was his first fight down at 145 pounds, but I don't believe that we truly saw that have a real effect on him. If anything, we would see it have an effect on him in terms of his cardio. I thought his cardio was fine. It was just a stylistic matchup going up against a guy like Giga Chikadze, who's highly versed or well versed in that striking and kickboxing realm, and he just could not get his game going there. Against Shane Young here, though, Shane Young seems like a guy that when things are going his way, he looks amazing, right? Like the Rolando D fight and the Austin Arnett fight, both different fights. Let's start off with the D1, where he was, pretty much the guy from the get-go that was setting the pace, setting the pressure, pushing forward, and really letting D pay. And then he just lands this beautiful step-in elbow that drops D and finishes him there. And the Austin Arnett fight, like, first round, he's kind of losing that fight up until the point that he lands a good flurry and kind of just rocks and wobbles Austin Arnett. It seemed like Austin was just doing that thing where he's just picking him apart from the outside, but no real damage or no real pop on his shots. And then whenever Shane Young landed, that's where the damaging shots were coming from. And even that, I don't want to say like heavily damaging. It was just really causing a reaction out of Austin, which I think was really swaying the judges in that fight. And then obviously the last second of the fight, you see Shane Young drop him when they go rock'em sock'em robots, and you can see the visible, frustration from Austin Arnett right after that, knowing that he gave away the fight just in that last little bit. But then again, he did lose those first 2 rounds as well. And then in the Ludovit Klein fight, you see Klein kind of start pushing the pressure and really start wearing on Shane Young, and then eventually finishing him with a head kick. Even the Alexander Volkanovski fight, right? He didn't let Shane Young get his game off and get him going, which is why he was able to kind of push him up and beat him the way that he did. I feel that Omar Morales is going to fall into the Ludovit Klein and the Alexander Volkanovski boat, which is moving forward, landing the big shots, not really letting Shane Young let his game go, and that will kind of keep Shane Young in a bit of a shell, and that will just let Omar to continue to let his game going. You know, we have a 3-inch height advantage in the favor of Omar, as well as a 1-inch reach advantage, but I think it's truly going to come down to the ferocity of the strikes and the power that Shane Young is going to feel from the Omar Morales side. Omar is obviously a Sanford MMA guy and is a diehard guy there, always training with Henry Hooft, and he's been in the gym pretty much for, since his Giga Chikadze fight, it seems like. But this seems like a great stylistic matchup for him to go out there and kind of just tear or chop down Shane Young. I think Shane Young is going to be kind of baffled with trying to get his strikes going. Whenever he tries to close the distance, I think he's going to feel the heat off of Omar Morales' strikes, and that's really going to start to play in his head and really start to drag him back in terms of the type of volume and output that he's going to be putting out. Again, in fights where he's the one kind of leading the dance and kind of is the one that's seems like he has the better striking and more damaging strikes, then he gets his game going. But it's going to be tough to see him, go up against a guy in Omar Morales who just doesn't fold, right? And Giga Chikadze was the closest to knocking him out, and obviously was the only one to ever beat him. But, it took a lot to kind of chop him down. And even with the calf kicks that he was implementing at the starting of the fight, he just couldn't really, continue to chop that leg. He was going for different strikes, and Omar was pretty much just walking through all of it and taking the strikes. I don't see Shane Young picking him apart the way that Giga was successful in doing so. I think he's going to, start to succumb to the kicks, start to succumb to the pressure and the punches of Morales. And I wouldn't even be surprised if I see Morales go out there and get a knockout finish either. So I do like Morales. I'll take him by a second round KO. He's probably like my strongest lean in this on this card too. This card's very, very tough to pick, and there's a lot of close fights. Even some odds are just a little bit too out of whack. But I do think that Morales is the safest spot here. I think that we'll see him go out there and beat Shane Young at his own game, push the pressure, stay in his face, land the big shots, land the bigger kicks, even mixing a takedown there if he wants to. I feel like he'll be the stronger guy on top, and he should be able to keep Shane Young down as well. So, Morales is 35. That's something to keep an eye on, but he only has 11 fights in his career. Doesn't really look like he's slowing down. Again, he is coming off of his first ever loss in his career, but he still does have I still think he has a couple good years to go out there and beat guys. And I think that Shane Young is definitely one of those guys that he could go out there and kind of outstrike for over 15 minutes. But I actually think that he knocks him out within 2 rounds here. So I'll go Omar, and I'll go with second round KO. Michal Oleksiejczuk versus Modestas Bukauskas. We got minus 150 on Oleksiejczuk and plus 130 on Bukauskas. Let's start off on the Oleksiejczuk side of things. We just don't seem to see all that often, right? I think it's only been 5 fights that he's added in the UFC. Obviously, he goes out there and springs a huge upset over Khalil Roundtree as a plus 300 dog. Unfortunately, that fight gets changed to a no contest as Oleksiejczuk pops for some sort of steroid. Comes back, finishes Gian Vellante in the first round, finishes Gadzimurad Antagulov in the first round, and then goes out there and puts a hell of a beating on Ovince St. Preux in that first round. And then in that second round, it seems like that OSP was comfortable in there. You know, he needed to get knocked around a couple times to start getting his game going. And then once he got Oleksiejczuk down, it was just one-way traffic. Then he eventually locked up that Von Preux choke and got the tap there. Similar thing in the Jimmy Crute fight. We see Jimmy Crute, well, he didn't have to endure the first round that Owens did, but we saw him go out there right away and try to get this fight to the ground. Landed a bunch of takedowns, was able to, finally get Oleksiejczuk down after hitting with a couple shots, really thinking that, getting Michal to think that, okay, maybe he's giving up on the takedowns now that he's striking. And then little does he know that Jimmy Crute was just setting up a beautiful double leg, which he eventually completed. And then eventually finished with the Kimura. Beautiful finish for Jimmy Crute in that fight. It's funny that both of these guys are coming off of losses to Jimmy Crute via finish. But we really saw the holes in Michal's games in the last two fights, which is takedown defense doesn't look the greatest. Now he needs to go out there and, start working on his strength and conditioning, something that he said that he was doing going into the Jimmy Crute fight, but it didn't really get to showcase that much. So I hope he was living in the wrestling room, because if fighters see that big of a glaring flaw in your game, they're going to go out there and try to implement that, especially if they're not normally a grappler or somebody that looks to go out there and look for a submission or anything like that. So that's a game of Michal. That's a part of Michal's game that I really want to see short up before I'm willing to go out there and put some money on the guy. But I do think he wins this fight. What is Michal's game? The guy likes to pretty much dig to the body as much as possible with his striking, stay in your face, pressure in your face, forever moving, always staying on the, never really staying still, just staying in your face and throwing shots out there. He rocked OSP a bunch of times in that first round. And I think he was expecting to get OSP out of there in the first round, but he just was not successful in doing so. But he just does such a good job of mixing up from the body to the head. Like, he just keeps it going nonstop, and it's really beautiful to see. Really, as a boxer, right? He doesn't really kick. The guy's more of his damage comes from his hands. Modestas Bukauskas, on the other hand, he's going to have a 3-inch height advantage as well as a 4-inch reach advantage, as well as a striking game that he brings into this. However, he does have a purple belt that he received December of 2019, and it feels like if his coaches are smart enough, that he's going to use that strength, he's going to use that power to drag this fight to the ground and implement that jiu-jitsu right away. It's clear as day that Michal definitely struggles off the ground, off of his back, and he just, his guard, like passing his guard is super, super easy. And, you may be as great on the feet as you are as Oleksiejczuk is, but like if you have nothing to offer off of your back, then you're never really going to be a champion. You're never really going to be a top 10 type of guy, and that seems like a path to victory that Modestas could take. But historically speaking, we don't really see it. And Jimmy Crute, albeit he did get Oleksiejczuk down and submit him the way that he did, he really had to work for those takedowns. So is a guy like Modestas Bukauskas going to be able to get him down with ease? That's a question mark to me. I'm not 100% sure. Again, we know he's a purple belt, so he's definitely been working his jiu-jitsu, so maybe that's something that he brings into this game. But historically speaking, he's a striker. He likes to go out there, use his big kicks, use his range, keep you on the outside, and more often than not, he's losing his fights up until the point he knocks his opponent out. Like if you watch the Nielsen fight and the Nosiglia fight, like all these fights are fights that he's kind of down and getting taken down, and his opponents are having a lot of success, but then he just gets back to his feet and then he knocks them out either with Travis Brown style elbows or just great striking or the solid power that he has. So those are question marks in terms of how Modestas wants to approach this fight. Because if he wants to go in the striking realm, I think he's going to be a little bit overwhelmed. Michal, again, likes to stay in your face. I think he's going to crowd Bukauskas, and he's going to keep him up against the cage, or at least keep him on the warning track and just continuously come forward, rip the body, go to the head. Again, he's going to have to deal with a 3-inch height disadvantage here. So I think ripping the body is going to be really, really big for him. And then obviously landing on that chin will be big for him too. Bukauskas does seem a little bit chinny. He does get hit a lot. He does not react well to most of his shots. And then obviously in his last fight against Jimmy Crute, gets knocked the fuck out. I think that Michal, if he can kind of stop takedowns, if that's what Modestas brings to the cage, I think that Modestas is going to be in a ton of trouble. So I like Oleksiejczuk here. I think he'll finish him in the first or second round, but I need to see those things short from him first. So I'm hoping that Bukauskas goes out there, tries to take this fight to the ground, and we see an improved grappling game from Oleksiejczuk, and then I'd be willing to invest in backing this guy again. But I like everything about him on the feet. He brings such a great style. His chin and durability seem to be on point. So even if he gets hit a little bit, he seems like he can continue to chug forward and dig big shots to the body and then bring it up to the head. And that's going to be very important in this fight against Bukauskas. So if Bukauskas gets this to the ground, it may not be one and done, right? He might have to work for it a little bit more, and we might see some improvements from Oleksiejczuk, who again is only 26 years old. Bukauskas is actually the older one in this fight, even though that Michal has the UFC experience. This will be his 19th fight compared to the 15th fight for Modestas. But again, Michal, you got to give him the benefit of the doubt that he's going to go out there and try to make as many improvements as he can. And one of those improvements is hopefully in the grappling room. Because if he truly rounds that part of his game out, I think this guy could be an absolute powerhouse in this 205-pound division. I'd actually like him to go down to 185, considering that he's such a smaller guy at 205 pounds. But I think that's probably a part of his game. Be the smaller guy, be the faster guy, use his punches, try to use his movement as much as possible. But it's not really worked out for him too well in his last two fights. However, I still think that he takes this fight. I think that Bukauskas might struggle to get him down. And even then, I just don't know if the purple belt will do it for him here. So I do think that Oleksiejczuk wins this fight, probably first or second round KO. But again, I want to see some improvements before I'm going out there and laying some money on my guy, Lord Michal. So I'll go Michal via second round KO. Abubakar Nurmagomedov versus Jared Gooden. We got minus 235 on Nurmagomedov and plus 195 on Jared Gooden. Let's start off on the Abubakar side here, who's coming off a loss in his UFC debut to David Zavada, where he got tapped out via, I believe it was a triangle choke. And we just saw his a little bit of laziness and lackadaisical approach in that guard of David Zavada. And that's where we saw David really take advantage of it and, lock up that choke. Before that, coming over from the PFL, where he went to a draw with UFC veteran Bojan Velickovic. And that's another fight where we see back and forth grappling. The main thing that I'm trying to get to here is that I'm just not overly impressed with Abubakar's ability to, one, get fights down. And once he gets them down, holding his opponents down. He's definitely not like his cousin Khabib in terms of that, but they obviously do have the same approach, which is trying to get the fight down ASAP and try to either lock up a submission or just grind up their opponents from on top. However, I'm just not a big fan of how little he passes guard. More often than not, he's just staying in the guard. I've seen numerous occasions where the referee in the matchup actually stands them up due to inactivity. Right, he just doesn't do enough from the bottom. And the funniest part is, like 4 fights ago, he comes in as a minus 1350 favorite against Pavel Kush and gets choked out. Like there's definitely levels between Khabib and Abubakar, and I think if people just see the Nurmagomedov last name, they're just going to be duped. I think they're going to be tricked, and I think he has that Nurmagomedov tax on his name, which is why he's a minus 235 favorite here. Like even after he lost to Pavel, he comes in as a minus 500 favorite. Obviously wins that fight. Comes in against Bojan Velickovic, minus 260 favorite, goes to a draw. Minus 265 favorite against David Zavada, loses that fight. He has 3 losses on his record, and they're just not the most impressive, right? Like he's just going out there and obviously taking these guys down and having some good success, but the fights are close. His cardio doesn't look the greatest. It feels like if he's not able to keep Jared down here, he could possibly get knocked out. I'm not willing to lay the minus 235 on this guy. And this is actually the first fight that I taped for this card, as I thought that I was going to lay that chalk and take him as my lock of the night play. But after running the tape, it's just, there's nothing that I truly see here that could, that makes me want to go out there and bet him. Like he's going to be at a slight height and reach disadvantage here against Jared Gooden. 5-inch reach advantage for Gooden, as well as a 1 or 2-inch height advantage. And I think that's going to be really prevalent once we see them in the cage. And that might make it a little bit harder for Abubakar to get this fight to the ground and truly get comfortable. he leaves a lot to be desired when it comes to the striking realm, doing the bare minimum required to try to get the fights to the ground. But then once he gets the fights to the ground, it's hard for him to truly go out there and establish any type of dominance. Jared Gooden, again, I didn't think the highest of him, but when you go back and watch this fight with Mike Graves, a guy, former UFC veteran, I believe he won the Ultimate Fighter, or at least just came up short. But that was a 5-round fight where, Graves was looking to get the fight to the ground as often as possible. And Gooden did a good job of nullifying the amount of pressure and top control that Graves was actually getting. He's getting back to his feet relatively easily and then laying some good damage from him on top, but obviously loses that fight via decision. But, then you see fights like the Marcel Stamps fight, which was only 4 fights ago, where it looks like he's gassed almost, but luckily for him, it looks like his opponent is even more gassed, but he's still getting him down. Gooden does a good job of getting right back to his feet in those instances and then locks up a standing guillotine choke against a guy that looks like he probably was about to have a heart attack, but it left a lot to be desired. Then he goes out there and beats guys who just, clearly not just regional level scrubs, to be honest. I'll give a little bit of respect to that Trent McCowan guy, but that Jay Jackson guy was like 3-13. I think that was more so an effort on Jared Gooden's part to stay active. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt there. But then he gets his UFC debut against Alan Jouban and gets outstruck in that fight, right? Great fight. Both guys getting rocked in several instances in that fight. But we saw Jouban really get the better of him in those exchanges. But I think that if Gooden hit Abubakar with some of those shots, I don't know if Nurmagomedov would continue chugging and continue moving forward. So there's a lot of question marks on this fight. I'm not willing to pay the chalk on Abubakar, but I'm not the most sold on Jared Gooden even at plus 195. I did see that his KO line is at plus 650, which is a little bit intriguing and worth a little bit of a sprinkle. But I do think that we see Nurmagomedov continue to get this fight to the ground and get it to the ground enough and nullify the KO of Gooden, and possibly even suck the energy out of Gooden in terms of his cardio, given the type of fight that it's going to be. We did see him go a hard 3 rounds against Jouban, but that was mainly in the striking realm. Mixing a little bit of grappling here, and we'll see what it looks like for Gooden. So, again, very slight lean here for Abubakar. I think, if anything, there might be some value on Gooden, especially value on his KO line, if that's something that you're looking to pursue. But that's the only thing that I could potentially pick here. So I'll go with Abubakar to win by decision. Not the most confident. Again, it's pertinent that he gets this fight to the ground, and it's pertinent that he passes guard, does a successful job of going out there and controlling Gooden on the ground, not letting him get back to his feet, because the more he gets back to his feet, the more it's going to gas out Abubakar, and the KO becomes even more live. A spot that might be a good idea, now that I'm thinking about it, is maybe even the under. I know Abubakar is mainly a decision type guy, but a submission could potentially open itself here. And then obviously you get saved on the other side with the Jared Gooden and his knockout power. We get plus 155 on their under 2.5. Again, nice, but I feel like there are some other plus money unders on this card that could be taken advantage of even more efficiently here. So, again, I'll go Abubakar. Not the most confidence here, so don't parlay him, because he could absolutely burn you really hard here. But I'll take him to win this fight via decision. Jessica Penne versus Hannah Goldy. We got plus 100 on Jessica Penne and minus 120 on 24 karat Goldy. Let's start off on the Jessica Penne side of things, who we haven't seen in a long time. She's fought, the last time she stepped into the cage, she fought Jamie Taylor in a fight where she did lose that fight via decision, pretty much just getting outstruck from the outside by Danielle Taylor. And that was actually a 3-fight losing streak, or capped off a 3-fight losing streak for Jessica Penne. In terms of the last time we did actually see her in the cage, April of 2017. So we're talking about close to 4 years ago now, where she was really going out there and not having the best performances. And it's weird to think that her 3-fight losing streak includes her titled shot, where she actually went out there and lost to Miocic, getting TKO'd on the feet in the 3rd round in that fight. I believe that was the first ever title defense for Miocic after she had beaten Carla Esparza earlier that year to capture the title. After that, she goes out there and fights Jessica Andrade and gets finished in the second round. And I'm sure everybody saw that one coming. And then the Danielle Taylor fight again, just kind of getting picked apart. Even though she had the distance control there, I think she was really struggling with the speed that was coming in and out on the Danielle Taylor side. And we saw her lose that fight. She was scheduled to fight Jodie Esquibel on 2 separate occasions. Those fights fall apart, and it comes down to the fact that she has some USADA violation that she was dealing with. A very unfortunate situation. It was well documented inside the media as well, and she was really struggling to get her fight career back. And thankfully, here she is coming back after a 4-year hiatus, and I think this is a very good spot for her to go out there and get back on the winning track. It would be her first win since she had beaten Randa Marcos on the Ultimate Fighter finale way back in 2014, December of 2014. So we're coming up on, just under 6.5 years since she has actually gotten her hand raised in the cage. And it's funny because coming from the Ultimate Fighter, though, she was a very highly touted prospect on the scene. You know what I mean? And in Invicta, she had won the title. I believe it was down at atomweight. She was the atomweight champion. Her victory over Naho Sugiyama was probably one of the most beautiful triangle choke finishes I've ever seen. You know, back in 2012, I was only a fan of MMA for about 3 to 4 years at that point in time, and the way that she set up that choke was probably one of the best that I've ever seen. So if you have access to UFC Fight Pass, I would highly suggest you guys go back and watch that finish. But it was definitely a thing of beauty, the way she was able to lock that up. Next time around, she goes out there and gets armbarred by Michelle Waterson, which is when Michelle Waterson becomes the atomweight champion and starts making a legacy of her own. After that, we see Jessica Penne win one more fight, as I believe she was like a minus 1,600 favorite, and that fight absolutely crazy that her odds were that high. And then she goes on to the Ultimate Fighter, where she ends up losing to Carla Esparza, I believe, in the second or third round of the tournament of the actual show. But she does still end up making it to the UFC, beating Randa Marcos on the finale, and then going on that 3-fight skid like I was talking about. I still think that she's very skilled, right? I think she has great jiu-jitsu. Her Muay Thai clinch is pretty underrated, and she does have decent striking from the outside, but that Danielle Taylor fight really leaves a lot to be desired. Now, Hannah Goldy, on the other hand, we're talking about a fighter that only had 6 fights. She's 28 years old, whereas Jessica Penne is 38 at this time, and she has 17 fights, so we're talking about over 3 times the amount of experience. But even Hannah Goldy hasn't been in the cage for a long time either. The last time we saw Hannah Goldy in the cage, she lost a unanimous decision to Miranda Granger, and that was August of 2019, the same night that Colby Covington actually beat Robbie Lawler, and that was what set him up for that title shot against Kamaru Usman. She's had numerous amounts of injuries. She had to just keep, listening to the doctors, and they kept pulling her out of fights, and unfortunately, she just wasn't able to stay active enough. Just following her IG, though, she seems like a woman that just stays fit, stays in shape, always stays training. And it seemed like she was getting sent out to the UFC PI more often than not to really just get her body checked out to clear her and make sure that she was good to go. Luckily for her, just like Jessica Penne, coming back after a pretty lengthy layoff, they're able to go back in there. And I think this is a great matchup in terms of getting 2 fighters that are coming off a significant layoff. Obviously, Jessica Penne even longer than Hannah Goldy, but at least this is a good way for them to go out there and get their feet wet once again. I'm hoping that if Jessica Penne loses this fight, they give her at least one more shot, because that would be her 4th straight loss in a row. Whereas Hannah Goldy, she's only coming off a 1-fight losing streak. And not to mention, it's not even a streak now that I'm talking about it. It was her first ever loss, period. Miranda Granger did a good job of keeping the fight at distance and really getting her shots off, and even, damaging her to the point of getting a hematoma to start growing out of the head of Hannah Goldy, I believe in the late first round or early second round. But it was just a lot of Hannah Goldy kind of, staying on the outside and not really doing the best in terms of closing the distance and getting her shots off. And that's what made her successful in that Callie Robbins fight on the Contender Series, where she was the one kind of getting pushed backwards. But when she felt confident enough, she was the one crashing forward, throwing her combinations and then getting back out of range. She does have a nice little flip front kick that she does, where she just, there's no real wind up. She gets it going from her front leg. Even when she's backing up, she just flicks it out there, kind of like a karate kick, but it's very effective. It keeps her opponents away from her, and then whenever she wants to go in there and close the distance and get it going, she's able to do so as well. the reach disadvantage here. We got a 6-inch we got a 6-inch reach advantage for Jessica Pena, as well as a 1-inch height advantage for Jessica Pena. But man, Hannah Goldy's got that Sean Shirk approach where she just doesn't have the greatest amount of reach, but she still makes do with it, right? She's still going out there and has a 5-1 record. Her first ever MMA fight was against Gillian Robertson, who had her first ever MMA fight against her as well. This took place at Island Fights, and since then they actually became training partners. If you guys check over the IG, there are numerous times where you see Hannah Goldy training with her at Fusion XL. Obviously, Gillian Robertson down in the Florida area as well. So it's good that they've made a relationship out of that. I'm not sure how often they're training together, but I'm sure she really wanted to get Gillian in there to really help her with the jiu-jitsu that she'll probably be feeling here from Jessica Pena. It's funny that they're also fighting on the same card here. I feel like Jessica Pena's best path to victory here is just clinch up as much as possible, or just stay completely out and try to pick her apart from the outside. But that's not really Jessica Pena's game, right? Like if she was able to do that, she would have beaten a girl like Danielle Taylor. Whenever they did clinch up and get into those like clinch exchanges, we saw Pena really have some success with landing some good knees, but it just wasn't enough. I think her success will come on the ground. If she's able to drag this fight to the ground, similar to how Callie Robbins was able to. The only unfortunate part about the Robbins fight was that Callie always got the takedowns later in the round, like with 40 seconds left, with 30 seconds left. She couldn't really get much going on from there. Whereas Jessica Pena, I think she's very good at her jiu-jitsu, that if she is successful in getting this fight down with like maybe a minute and a half or 2 minutes left, she could really start threatening Hannah Goldy, passing guard, or even getting her back and probably sinking in a choke as well. So I do lean the Jessica Pena side of things here. I think that she does have the chops to go out there and win this fight. I'm just not the most confident, and it completely shows on the betting line here. I will take Pena. I think she'll win by decision, by locking up Goldy and trying to drag this fight to the ground, hitting sweeps, whatever it is. But we do got to remember that Goldy is a very, very strong individual. She's just an absolute unit, probably the most stacked woman I've ever seen when it comes to muscularity and just pure raw strength. So Pena's going to have to deal with that for sure, but I think she'll be successful in getting this fight to the ground. Again, coming from Alliance MMA with Eric Del Fiero and a great training camp behind you, I'm sure they have a great game plan to go out there and try to, put it on Goldy and especially try to get that submission. But I think ultimately it's going to come down to a decision, and we see Jessica Pena go out there, grind this fight out, land some good shots on the outside, stay away from the big power of Hannah, and then, again, wrap her up, try to get this into the grappling realm, and truly show off your jiu-jitsu. So I'll go with Jessica Pena here to win this fight via decision. Alonzo Menifield versus William Knight, and this fight is pretty much a pick'em. We do see Alonzo Menifield as a slight favorite at most of these bookies as well too, but no higher than like -115, -120. So let's start off on the Alonzo Menifield side, who's coming off a two fight losing streak, both of those being his only ever losses in his career. And definitely a wake-up call that he required, especially getting away with the ways he's been winning in his prior fights, right? The Deshaun Boatwright fight, I believe that was an 8-second fight. Vinicius Moreira, the guy had nothing to give to him on the feet, and Alonzo Menifield was able to make him pay and get the knockout there. Paul Craig, same thing, was able to get him out of there relatively quickly. Now, the Devin Clark fight, a lot of people expected Menifield to go in there as a -230 favorite and absolutely starch Clark. But Clark did a good job of, keeping this fight in the clinch areas, keeping this fight, skin to skin, so that Menifield couldn't really get his shots off. And then by the time Menifield, got into the third round, most of the energy and pop was really off of his shots. Whereas, Devin Clark continued to move forward, kept the pressure on him, and did really, really good work. You do have to give Menifield some props in that fight, though. We did see him keep the fight on the feet for the most part, shuck off a bunch of takedowns, and Devin Clark was just left, trying to pretty much clinch fuck him and get a bunch of control time and win the fight that way. And he was successful in doing so. Against Ovin St. Preux, we just saw Menifield show, it was a tough fight. We saw OSP, pretty much on his bicycle the entire time. I was happy to catch OSP in that fight at that +140 range. But we saw OSP continuously moving, even though Alonzo Menifield was the one moving forward for the most part. But we saw him ripping that kick up the body. And from that southpaw stance, we saw OSP just absolute butcher the body of Alonzo Menifield with that front kick up the middle, and it was landing pretty much at all times. In that second round, there's an instance where there was like 15 or 16 unanswered strikes from OSP, against Menifield, where he just kept ripping the body, and Menifield just didn't know how to close the distance. didn't really know how to put his punches together and seemed quite lost out there. And that's very unfortunate to see from a guy, especially from Fortis MMA, under the tutelage of Saif Sayud, as you believe somebody like that would be able to, have a plan B if things really weren't going their way. But, it could have been the cardio. It could have been the fact that Menifield just really didn't know how to close that distance effectively. And those body shots were definitely adding up. So you don't want to take too much away from those as well, too. Now, Menifield, we know his game, right? He moves forward. He likes to throw bombs, and more often than not, his opponents fall before him. But when they're not, things get a little bit sketchy, as we saw in his last two fights against Clark and OSP, right? Also, talk about a beautiful counter from OSP to put Menifield's lights out. Beautiful, beautiful finish there from OSP. Now, William Knight, on the other hand, we're talking about a fighter that's 9-1. His only losses to Tafon and Chukwi, who's in the UFC now as well. Almost a similar style where he was just going out there and absolutely battering these guys on the feet, showing that he could still finish guys later in fights too. I believe the Rocky Edwards fight is one that went into the third round. Still got to finish there. But that second round was pretty much an entire stalemate, as we saw Rocky Edwards on the back of William Knight, and William Knight just holding on for dear life with on that one arm of Rocky Edwards, pretty much keeping his stalemate. No damage done, no real work being done from either guy. So we saw William Knight come out in that second round and look much better, look cleaner and crisper, and landing the beautiful one to drop Rocky Edwards on his butt. Then we saw William Knight come into the Cody Brundage fight. That was the Contender Series fight. And Brundage gets the takedown, gets his back almost immediately. And we see a similar thing like we saw in the Rocky Edwards fight. We saw William Knight just holding onto that arm, and Cody just could not get it out. The referee, Cody eventually tries to move, especially from the instigation from Herb Dean in terms of threatening him that he's going to put them back on the feet. And then we see William Knight take advantage of that transition, get back to his feet, and then Brundage right back in on a takedown. And we see William Knight ring down those Travis Brown style elbows and get the finish there. The Alexa Camor fight, that was a very solid fight and a good showcase that we saw from William Knight. And that's the type of fighter, or that's the type of fight I want to see from guys like a Tom Aspinall, right? I was kind of shitting on Aspinall the other week, saying that we've never seen him in the second and third round have solid cardio. Then he goes out there and proceeds to finish Arlovsky within the first minute of that second round, but it still doesn't answer my questions, which seem like Tom Aspinall slowing down a little bit in that first round, and I'd like to still see how he looks in round 2 and round 3. Whereas William Knight, we've seen him, in a grueling fight, a clinch-heavy fight, both guys wearing on each other in the cage. But in that second round, we saw William Knight land a beautiful takedown, beautiful trip takedown. In the third round, same thing, saw him land a beautiful trip takedown, and then doing some good work from on top, maintaining that position. Will he be able to get Alonzo Menifield done? I'm a little bit skeptical about that. I'm not 100% sure. Given the fact that Devin Clark couldn't get Menifield down, hold him down. I'm not sure if Knight will be able to do the same thing. I do think though, if this fight does play out in the grappling and clinching round for the most part, I gotta give the slight advantage to William Knight. I feel like he'll have more power and he'll have more cardio as well too, to at least last those 3 rounds and really just continue to put the pressure on William Knight, on Alonzo Menifield. Now a lot of people might say, okay, this fight, take the under 1.5, somebody's going to go to sleep. But we often see when two guys that have heavy power go up against each other that sometimes they just stalemate. And, one guy might just control the clinch realm and the grappling realm, and they end up winning a decision victory, right? Similar instances as of late that come to mind is like Marcin Prachnio versus Khalil Roundtree, Michel Pereira versus Chaos Williams. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that both guys that are knockout artists are going to go in there and try to knock each other out. There's got to be a level of respect from both sides, and both guys might be like, okay, I don't want to get knocked out, but I do want to play this fight as safe as possible. And from what I've seen in the cage thus far, I would have to lean the William Knight side of things because he seems a little bit more aggressive when it comes to the clinch game. We've seen him do some good damage from on top. That is, if he's able to get Menifield to the ground. I think the later this fight goes, obviously it's more live for Knight to get him to the ground. But yeah, I lean Knight. In terms of power, it's almost a wash. Explosiveness is on both guys here. Size is slightly on the Menifield side, who's 2 inches taller. 3 inches taller. William Knight, 3-inch reach disadvantage as well. Yeah, I'm on the William Knight side here, but I just don't see myself playing it. Like, if we get a crazy number on the over 1.5, I'd probably look at that. But outside of that, this fight, I'm gonna stay away from. Maybe on DraftKings, it might be a solid play on either side, considering there could potentially be a knockout. But I would not be entirely surprised if we see this fight go 15 minutes. So maybe even looking at that fight goes to decision line might be something to look at. But I do like Knight here. I think he'll be able to control the positions more. I think his chin and durability will hold up. And, I think Menifield is truly one of those guys that will be knockout or bust every time out. And I think that William Knight will just have more in the tank at this point in time and has definitely showcased more to us in his past fights. So I'll go on the William Knight side of things. Again, though, I will say, if he does end up on his back, things could get a little bit iffy, but I'm not entirely sure or sold on what the top game of Menifield is like, and if he'll truly even be able to hold a guy like William Knight down. We did see William Knight get held down by Jamel Jones, but that guy was definitely a weight class above, took that fight on short notice, and was holding down William Knight pretty easily. And then once we saw the next round start, we saw Jamel just absolutely gas out. William Knight landed a bunch of bombs, and Jamel actually absolutely tapped out in that fight. So durability, longevity, cardio, I lean William Knight. And I think that's all, like, that main X factor is going to be all it takes for the guy to get their hand raised. So I'll be going with William Knight, and I'll go with, oh man, I'm going to say decision. I can't believe I'm saying it, especially for a fight like this, but I'm going to say decision because I think that we'll see this fight play out similar to the Alexa Kamor fight, where we see these guys just clinch up time and time again. Nobody gets a real shot off enough that will knock the other guy out. And maybe see William Knight get this fight to the ground. The only thing that gives me pause is the fact that Devin Clark wasn't able to get the takedown, but we'll see what kind of game that William Knight's able to bring here and if he's able to get Menifield to the ground. So I'll go with William Knight to win this fight via decision. Khama Worthy versus Jamie Mullarkey. We got minus 130 on Khama and plus 110 on Mullarkey. Let's start off on the Khama Worthy side of things, who's coming off a loss to Otman Azaitar, where he got put out in that first round, had to deal with the big power of Azaitar, and unfortunately crumbled and succumbed to a KO loss there. That was his 7th loss in his 23-fight career, and obviously it was on the biggest stage of his career in his 3rd fight in the UFC, after coming off of 2 very impressive victories where he was a plus 650 underdog against Devontae Smith, goes in there and starches him relatively quickly, and then submits Luis Pena. I believe that fight ended in the 3rd round, but he was a plus 215 underdog in that fight as well. And then obviously in the Azaitar fight, he comes in as a slight underdog and loses that fight. In this fight, however, he is a very slight favorite. He has great great striking, usually more of a counter striker than anything, has a very high and tight guard, and he usually waits for his opponents to kind of strike, and then he gets his striking going. Unfortunately for him, in the Azaitar fight, he let his strikes go first, and Azaitar was the one that was countering, and then ultimately landed the strike that, start to wobble Khama goes down, and we see Azaitar follow up with a bunch of strikes and get the finish there. So beautiful finish from Azaitar, and I believe that was a card where I actually cashed that round 1 prop on Azaitar. I think it was plus 350 or something like that. Absolutely crazy considering the amount of first round finishes that Azaitar has. But we're talking about Khama Worthy here. So even dating back to his regional days, the one reason I kept fading him, well, obviously not in the Devontae Smith spot because I'm not going to be playing a minus 1,000 favorite, but I did have Luis Pena as a pretty heavy favorite in that fight because I thought it was going to be a pretty easy fight for him. When you look back at his fight against, I believe the kid's name is Johnny Munoz, a guy who was completely undersized, a little bit out of shape, could have probably fought a weight class or 2 below. You saw him get Khama Worthy down over and over again without much resistance, and then obviously we see Khama start to stuff the takedowns later in the fight and then eventually pull away with the decision victory. Even in the Ward fight, giving up a couple takedowns, gets back to his feet and then knocks his opponent out. But it was his takedown defense that was pretty much lacking, that led me to believe that Luis Pena would be able to get him down time and time again, just like he did in the 2nd round, and really grinding him out there. And then unfortunately in that 3rd round, just I don't know whether it was an adrenaline dump, gas tanked up, whatever it was. We saw him give up a guillotine choke there to Khama Worthy. But I still believe that Worthy has those flaws in his game. And a guy like Jamie Mullarkey, who's kind of like a jack of all trades, but, middle of the pack in all of those traits, could still go out there and beat a guy like Jamie, like Khama. Jamie has decent striking. He does a good enough job in terms of blending his strikes with his grappling and his takedowns, just as we saw in the Fares Ziam fight. And even though he came up on the losing end there, pretty much everybody had that fight for Jamie Mullarkey, myself included, especially that third round. I think that's the one that it truly came down to. And I believe there was over 78 to 79% of votes on MMA decisions for Jamie Mullarkey to win that third round, which means he should have won the entire fight. Unfortunately for him, Ziam comes out on the winning end, but we did see some good things from Jamie there. Again, mixing up his strikes with his takedowns, which I think is going to be very important for him here against Khama. I think that we see a very good chin and solid durability from Jamie, especially in that fight against Brad Riddell, where it was just an absolute slugfest and an absolute war. I believe he got dropped only one time in that fight, but throughout it showed great durability against a very heavy-handed Brad Riddell, who had some solid power going into that fight. I believe Jamie has been finished twice before in his career via strikes, but as of late, his durability has definitely held up for him. I think that this is a solid spot for him to go out there and grind out a decision victory over Khama Worthy, but that could also be my own subconscious bias in terms of not being a big fan of Khama Worthy. I don't think the guy is like super skilled. Again, I'll say that his striking looks good, and he did a good job of getting back to his feet in some of his fights in the past. But I feel like Jamie Mullarkey will do a good job of just controlling this fight up against the cage, dragging it into the ground, and then even adding that Dan Kelly judo to his repertoire. I think that he'll be able to mix in a couple of those hip tosses and get this fight to the ground and really grind out Khama. So I do lean Mullarkey here. I think he's the better overall fighter. As long as his durability holds up, I feel like he'll put the pressure onto Khama, really push him up against the cage, drag the fight to the ground, accrue a bunch of control time, and at plus money, you kind of got to favor the guy that seems to have an all-around game, even though he's coming off of a 2-fight losing streak, and Khama Worthy is only coming off of a first-round knockout loss. I still feel like, let's take recency bias out of it. Let's wipe this slate clean in terms of what they've been coming off of. And I feel like you got to lean Jamie Mullarkey here due to his ability to just mix up the MMA game much better than Khama Worthy. So, yeah, I do like Mullarkey here. I think he's a solid dog spot. I think he could drag this fight to the ground and really give Khama some troubles. The longer this fight stays on the feet, though, and at range, I think that Khama will have the advantage. But I feel like given what we've seen in the Jamie Mullarkey fight against Fares Ziam, he should be able to close the distance and really get his game going. Again, I believe it was incompetent judging that gave round 3 to Ziam in their fight, so it truly should have been a Mullarkey victory after that, but I hope that we don't get that type of bad judging this time around. I think we see him at least take 2 rounds here by taking Khama Worthy down time and time again and really accruing control time, and hopefully his durability holds up because Khama definitely can crack, I'll give him that, but again, I just don't think he's the greatest all-around fighter, which is why I do favor Mullarkey here, and I'll take him to win this fight via decision. Gillian Robertson versus Miranda Maverick. We got plus 120 on the Canadian Gillian Robertson and minus 140 on Fear the Maverick, Miranda Maverick. We'll start off with the Gillian Robertson side of things, where she's coming off a decision loss to Tyler Santos, who just clearly showed she was the stronger woman, and she was able to stay out of the submissions of Gillian Robertson. And I feel really bad for Gillian because there were some very near submission attempts where she was throwing up arm bars, throwing up triangles, but it seemed like she was just in a bad position, like being up against the cage and not really able to fully extend, and then also getting these near submissions near the ending of the round and not really getting the extra maybe 15, 20, or 30 seconds that she needed to complete those. She's coming off before that, she was coming off of 2 wins over Courtney Casey and Poliana Botelho, submitting one and going to a decision with the other. And those were 2 fights where I actually took the under 2.5 as well. And more often than not, these Gillian Robertson under 2.5s are the spots that I like to look at. And this fight is no different. And the Casey one, it came a little bit too late. I think it was a minute and a half too late where she ended up locking up the submission. And then the Poliana Botelho fight, that was a fight where We saw Gillian Robertson with the top control for the majority of that fight, but we just didn't see Poliana do anything to try to get back to her feet. Or it might have been the other way around, but regardless, we just didn't see the urgency from Botelho in terms of trying to get back to the feet, which, usually opens up the submission paths for Gillian Robertson. So Gillian just pretty much won that fight off of control. We saw her get pretty much laced up by Macy Barber. She wasn't successful in getting that fight to the ground long enough to pull off a submission. And we know the striking game of Robertson is very, very much lacking. And then obviously the fight before that, she mounted Sarah Froto and got a beautiful KO via ground and pound there. That's pretty much Gillian Robertson's game, though. She's diving for takedown. She's going for the single leg, and I think that's pretty much what her game is based around. And it's very easy to prepare for a woman like Gillian Robertson. Just work that takedown defense as much as possible, and then obviously work the jiu-jitsu as much as possible to stay out of that funky and powerful and offensive style of Gillian Robertson when it comes to the grappling realm. She really needs to work on her hands, though, as I feel that if she works on her hands more, she can kind of start to trick her opponents into thinking, okay, maybe she's going to want to be a striker for this round or something like that, and that's where she's able to open up the takedown opportunities for herself. But she's just fighting so often that it doesn't seem like she's truly evolving the rest of her game. Like, it's just always, I'm going to go in there with the same game plan, which is try to take you down or pull guard or whatever it is, get this into the grappling realm and try to pull off a submission. I wonder how long that's going to work for her, though. You know what I mean? Like, she's 3-2 in her last 5 fights. Okay, that's cool. But if she's just not able to evolve, like, how is she going to continue to beat other women in this division? Like, this is a 125-pound division. You're going up against Valentina Shevchenko if you find yourself at the top of this division. You really think Shevchenko is going to succumb to a style like that? Probably not. It does lead to very entertaining fights, as Robertson normally, goes out there and gets the win, or goes out there and goes out on her shield. And, in that fight against Tyler Santos, she was just absolutely outmuscled and just couldn't pull off any type of submission in that fight. Her striking is pretty much just laid down to, I'm going to flash a couple strikes out there, try to feint a couple times, change levels on you a couple times. But at the end of the day, the thing that I'm going to put 100% into is that takedown, and then eventually the offensive jiu-jitsu, which is her game. Now, on the other side, you got Miranda Maverick, who's 23 years old. I believe she's studying for her PhD or her master's or something like that. So she's a part-time student, part-time fighter. But when you see her every single time out, she's making improvements. And I think that's very key here, as she's still very young. And even though some people might bank on the fact that, okay, she's a student, so she might not be as focused on the fighting game, but the fighting game allows her to pay for her studies, which is why she's so focused on the fighting aspect of it as well too. So it's pretty much based on what you perceive their perspective to be. And you can listen to fighter interviews and say, okay, this is what she thinks, but like, you always have to take these fighter interviews with a grain of salt for sure. So Miranda Maverick, she's coming on a 4-fight winning streak right now. That's not including her Phoenix Series fights that she had with Invicta. Obviously, those are just exhibition fights. They do these one-night tournaments where these fights don't officially count until you fight your final fight. So I'm not even taking those fights into consideration. But her last fight, she did win via doctor stoppage against Liana Jojo, where she landed a beautiful step-in elbow, upward elbow, I believe it was, landed right on the nose of Liana and just busted her upper immediately. That cut just would not stop bleeding. Now, could that fight have gone on longer? Yeah. Even Liana Jojo herself wanted to be like, hey, I can still fight. It's just a cut. We've seen much worse cuts and much worse spots, and the referee still allows them to fight. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if it had anything to do with the fact that, as a woman, and I, hate to be sexist or anything like that, but I feel as though they do cater a little bit more towards the women in terms of the amount of damage that they're taking. Regardless, beautiful performance from Miranda Maverick on the feet. She showed great and improved Muay Thai. Her striking just looked on point. Her step and elbows were beautiful. And then in the fight before that, it was her Invicta fight against Pearl Gonzalez, where she came in as a very slight underdog, but still went out there and did some good work. She was able to keep up with the transitions from Pro Gonzalez, do some good work from on top, land some good damage from on top, have some solid success with the striking as well too. But I think this is a girl that we're going to see an evolution from every single time out. Now, I'm not the most, keen on going out there and betting her at that minus 140 range. But I do think this is a fight where she could outpower Gillian Robertson. I think Robertson will obviously have the jiu-jitsu advantage here. That's without a doubt. And I do think that she would be successful in getting Miranda Maverick down. But then it comes into the parts where, like, how much does the strength play into it? And how much does the improvements of Miranda Maverick change the trajectory of this fight? Now, the parts that I see where we'll see Maverick have success is obviously the striking. So if she's able to keep it there, that's where she'll have the most amount of success. But I do think she is live for a finish. I think both women are live for a finish here. That's why I'm probably going to go back to the well of betting a Gillian Robertson under here. We got plus 150, which is a solid enough line for me to take the shot, considering that both women are very live for a finish, whether it's a submission on either side or even a ground and pound from the Miranda Maverick side. Or if this fight stays on the feet long enough that Miranda Maverick is able to get her paws on her, land some good strikes, land some good kicks, land some good elbows, and eventually just put away Gillian Robertson on the feet. So I'll side with Miranda Maverick, and I'll side with the under 2.5, which I think is very, very live. But I think that Maverick's strength is going to be a little bit too much for Robertson, and she might be able to catch her in these bad positions and just start unloading on her with some ground and pound. And I think that's a very, very live spot here as well too. So I'll go with Maverick. I'll go with KO or ground and pound. I don't know whether round 1 or round 2, but just for the sake of it, let's try to keep the trend of round 2 women's finishes that I'm calling. So I would say round 2, Miranda Maverick wins this fight either by ground and pound or just striking on the feet. So once again, I'll go with Miranda Maverick via KO, ground and pound, whatever you want to call it. Sean O'Malley versus Thomas Almeida. We got minus 320 on the perennial favorite, Sean O'Malley, and then we got plus 260 coming back on the veteran Thomas Almeida. Let's start off on the Sean O'Malley side of things, where he's coming off a loss to Marlon Vera in a fight where he started off pretty well. You know what I mean? We got the classic Sean O'Malley getting his kicks out there, getting his punches out there, but Marlon Vera is a notorious slow starter, so it definitely makes sense as to why Sean O'Malley was able to have as much success as he did in that first fight, or in the first couple minutes of that fight. Then we see Sean O'Malley hurt his leg, and that's when we see Marlon Vera notice that Sean O'Malley hurt his leg. And that's when you see Marlon Vera really start to turn it on and put it on to Sean O'Malley. And it's just very unfortunate, right? Sean O'Malley, super talented kid. You know, you may not want to agree with what he does outside of the cage or what he says outside of the cage, but the guy definitely has some skills inside the cage. And he has great fight IQ inside the cage too, right? He's able to set up traps just like he did against Eddie Wineland, right? I mean, if you guys remember that like fake uppercut that he got to Eddie Wineland to wince on, and then he comes over with another strike and puts him out that way. Like, it's just amazing the things that he's able to do inside the cage when he's truly at 100%. You know, even his Quinones finish, right? He wasn't truly impressed with himself there, as he believed that Quinones was probably already defeated coming into the cage in that spot. And who could be mad at that? He was a minus 290 favorite going into that fight. Then he was a minus 580 favorite going into the Eddie Wineland fight. Minus 280 favorite once again going into the Marlon Vera fight. Now here he is against Thomas Almeida as a minus 320 favorite. And I gotta say, if Thomas Almeida even gives us like 80% of what he used to be, this is probably the first or second hardest fight in Sean O'Malley's career, at least as of late in the UFC. Again, what O'Malley does great, right? He sets up traps. His striking is good. His kicks are definitely very good too. He's very fast. His agility is definitely one of his strong suits. And I believe his ability to get in and out of exchanges truly helps him to be very successful, especially when knocking guys out and cashing those bonuses. Thomas Almeida, on the other hand, you guys remember him from his heyday when he's like flying knee knocking out Brad Pickett and just having these great performances, picking these guys apart with his Muay Thai and then finishing them. Then he starts running into rough times, right? He gets a headlining spot against Cody Garbrandt as a minus 200 favorite. This is Cody Garbrandt bantamweight champion. He goes into that Garbrandt fight as a minus 200 favorite, gets knocked out. Then he goes out there, redeems himself as a minus 300 favorite against Albert Morales and gets the victory there via KO. Beautiful finish for him there. Then he goes on a 3-fight losing streak. Loses a decision to Jimmy Rivera as a plus 160 dog. You got to let that one slide. Gets knocked out by Rob Font, which right now doesn't look the worst, right? You got Rob Font going out there headlining a fight. I'm trying to remember who he's headlining against, but he has a big fight coming up as well where he's the headliner. So not too bad of a loss to Rob Font there. And then most recently, the Jonathan Martinez fight where he gets pretty much picked apart over 3 rounds. And that was his first fight after a lengthy layoff where he had numerous eye surgeries as well to just correct some issues that were going on in there. So you got to give him props for one getting back into the cage after an injury that was potentially harming the vision in his eye, and 2 going in there against a guy like Jonathan Martinez, who even though he just got knocked out by Davey Grant, is still a very dangerous opponent. Thomas Almeida, it seemed like he was very hesitant to close the distance. It almost seemed like he was a little bit too scared to get hit in the eye. And that jab was really stinging Thomas Almeida and keeping him on the outside, which didn't really let him close the distance and get his own game going. And that's another thing that he's going to have to deal here with Sean O'Malley, who has a 4-inch height advantage as well as a 2-inch reach advantage. But I think the kicks and the jab are truly going to cause Thomas Almeida some issues here. I think if we see a little bit of Almeida, like old school Almeida, where he's actually ripping kicks and he doesn't really matter or doesn't really mind what's coming back his way, we could see him have some success here. But it's just so hard to truly, invest in him, even as a plus 260 dog. It's really tough. I feel like this is a solid spot for O'Malley to go out there and kind of redeem himself and kind of just, put on one of those classic Sean O'Malley performances. And that's really hard to say, especially for a guy like Thomas Almeida, who's only 29 years old. It's not like he's challenging Father Time or anything at this point. It's just his durability seems to be taking a little bit of a hit, as well as, just his last showing was just not the most pleasant. You got to give him the benefit of the doubt, right? Coming after such a long layoff and the injuries and all that type of stuff. So let's just say that, okay, let's chalk that up to him trying to get his feet wet again. But even still, right? I think this is a tough one where Sean O'Malley will be the faster one, probably hits heavier too, and will probably really put it on him once this fight really gets going. I want to give a shout out to my guy Rockstar Z here, who's probably taking the best approach, right? You take the fight doesn't go to decision. You take the fight doesn't start round 3. If this fight, if the total was set out 2.5, I'd probably be hitting the under 2.5 here, but they do have that 1.5, and that always gives me a little bit of pause. But I think that this is a perfect matchup for O'Malley to just go out there. If he's able to, check some of the kicks that I expect Thomas to go out there and start throwing, and then just get his own game going, I think it's going to be a very short night for Thomas Almeida. So with that said, I'm just not the most keen on going out there and betting a minus 320 in Sean O'Malley, who, again, this is probably his toughest test if we see even 80% of what Thomas Almeida used to be. And, who knows what the health and the constant issues that O'Malley has with his leg. Like, it's not just the Sukumtat fight. It's not just the Vera fight. It even happened in his regional days. So, do you really want to invest minus 320 in a guy that could potentially just slump on over and be like, my ankle, my leg? I'm not really down to do that. Even his KO prop is like minus 105. That's not what I really want to be betting here. So I would rather cover both outcomes here in case Almeida does end up getting a finish or O'Malley just ends up stubbing his foot again or some shit. I like the approach with the fight to not start round 3, which is minus 120, which is not too bad. Under 2.5, which is minus 150. It looks like on a couple places, minus 185. But the under 1.5 is just so sketchy because, again, who knows if you need more than 7.5 minutes or not. Sometimes it takes guys a little bit longer to truly get comfortable in there and get their games going. So I do like O'Malley here. I think he ends up getting the finish, and I'll take him to win this fight actually by first round KO. Tyron Woodley versus Vicente Luque. We got minus 255 on Luque and plus a 215 on T Wood, Tyron Woodley. Let's start off on the Woodley side, who's coming off a little bit of a rough stretch where he's coming off of 3 straight losses now. One where he lost his title against Kamaru Usman, then he lost to Gilbert Burns, and then he lost to Colby Covington. The last one, he gets a rib injury in the last round, but he loses that. That was in September of 2020. Now here he is against a stylistically different matchup than he's had to go up against in his last 3 fights. He's getting an actual striker, right? The last couple times he's fought a striker, he darts chokes Darren Till, has that weird little 2 fights with Wonderboy Thompson, knocks out Robbie Lawler. And yeah, those are the main strikers that he's fought as of late. Vicente Luque is a little bit of a different striker than those guys, right? This guy's a great Muay Thai fighter, has great leg kicks, has great combinations. He's taken a ton of damage in his career, but he's never been knocked out in the UFC or, I believe ever, to be honest. I just want to confirm that, but I'm pretty sure that's something that he's never been knocked out. And in terms of his knockdowns, he's only been knocked down twice, I believe, while inside the UFC. I do want to confirm that. So he's got knocked down by Wonderboy Thompson. and then he got knocked down by Brian Barberena, and that was back in February of 2019. But, since then, he's gone out there and had victories over Derek Krantz, Mike Perry, lost to Wonderboy Thompson, obviously, and then beats Nico Price and Randy Brown. And then Tyron Woodley is obviously just a much different opponent that he's had to face. Actually, probably the best wrestler that he's faced to this point in time. But then again, when's the last time you've really seen Tyron Woodley use his wrestling to the best of his abilities, right? Long gone are there Strikeforce days where Tyron Woodley just takes his opponents down time and time again and then just grinds them out or knocks him out on his feet with the big power that he has in his hands. But as of late, and I think this is a version of Tyron Woodley that's always been around, at least in the UFC, especially since he's won the title, is just find that big bomb or you're probably going to lose this fight, right? Outside of the Darren Till fight, but that's a fight that the finishing sequence started because he landed his big bomb. And if he's not able to land that big bomb, what's going to happen? More often than not, he gets grinded out, he gets decisioned, and that's what I could see happening in this fight against Vicente Luque. But I think that there's a possibility of a finish from the Luque side, who's probably one of the more nasty strikers that he's fought in recent memory. Closest that comes to mind is Gilbert Burns, who rocked him and dropped him on numerous occasions in their fight. Right, Tyron Woodley just has this issue where he's low activity, keeps backing up. He has a great, run in that first 60 seconds of the rounds, but then after that, it just goes back to I'm going to continue to move on my back foot and telegraph my big shots. And then when that big shot comes, more often than not, his opponent sees it coming. They get out of the way, they get their own combination going, and then we just rinse and repeat. Same thing for Tyron Woodley over and over again. I thought that the one time that we would see him kind of get away from that and actually really go for it was against Colby Covington, right? You have all this heat and animosity going into the fight. You have all the reason in the world to go out there and decapitate this guy, but he doesn't do it, right? He just doesn't do it. What makes you think that he's going to do it against a guy like Vicente Luque? Maybe that now that he knows that his job is on the line, he is, I just want to confirm his age. He's 36 years old. Like, he's really got to get it going. Sorry, he's 38 years old. He'll be 39 in April. Like, he's really got to get it going if he wants to get any W's again. But I think if he loses this fight, it's probably the last one in the UFC for him, right? Dana White doesn't really have the greatest relationship with him. I'm sure they wouldn't mind letting him go over to Bellator and continue doing his thing over there, maybe rack up a couple of knockouts over there. But, with Luque, he's going to have to deal with a ton of pressure. He's going to have to deal with a lot of different strikes coming his way. And even if he looks to take this fight to the ground, he's going to struggle to keep Vicente Luque down, right? He's going to have a lot of jiu-jitsu to worry about. Vicente Luque has a pretty good get-up game as well. This is a very tough stylistical matchup for Woodley. I'm kind of hoping that we'd get a better line on Luque, as soon as this fight was announced, I'm like, oh, that's probably going to be my lock of the night play. But I do want to be a little bit cautious and wary of it, as Woodley does still have devastating power, that if he does land on the chin of Luque, he could definitely put him out and make it a lot of trouble. However, with that said, if you are looking to back Woodley here, just like Francis Ngannou, do not leave any money on the table. Take Woodley. I wish I had the KO props available to us right now, but we don't. But Woodley inside the distance is plus 600. That's a spot that you want to take if you want to take any spot in this fight at all, at least on the Woodley side. With Luque, I think he's live for a finish himself, or even just to win this fight by decision, and decision is probably the way that I'll go with. But there's just so much more to worry about on the Luque side than on the Woodley, like in terms of the strikes that are going to be coming his way, the pace that he pushes, and the leg kicks that he throws out there. And there's just so much for Woodley to worry about. It's just Luque needs to mind his P's and Q's. He's got to make sure that he, rolls with his shots, sees the shots coming, stays out of the way of the big shots. And if he's able to do that, I think he can do that over 15 minutes, right? Again, we're talking about a guy that's never been knocked out. People want to continue to bang on his durability issues and all that, but it's never really reared its ugly head yet, right? He's gotten knocked down a couple times, but he's never been finished. So I feel like he has great awareness. Even when he is hurt, he's able to really get the fight back into into the swing of things, which is like getting his strikes going, clinching up with his opponent, whatever it may be. But Woodley, man, his cardio is too much of a concern, his inactivity is too much of a concern, and his reliance on that one punch knockout is just way too much of a concern to put serious money on his side. So plus 600 by inside the distance. Again, probably a solid line for Woodley, especially if you think that he's going to be motivated enough to go out there and really actually throw. But he's been saying that for his last 3 fights, and he just isn't able to do so. So yeah, I do like Luque here. I think he wins this fight via decision. I think this is a great stylistic matchup for him and a great name to get under his belt too, right? This is a guy in Luque who's just been around the game for so long, and whenever he's reached that pinnacle, he always kind of falls short. Wonderboy Thompson obviously being the last guy that comes to mind, but this Woodley fight is a very winnable fight for him, and I think this is a fight that we see him go out there and win pretty handedly. So I'll go with Luque. I think he wins this fight via decision, and this could possibly be the last fight of Woodley's UFC career. I wouldn't be surprised if the UFC goes out there and releases him after this, but I will go with Vicente Luque to win this fight via decision. Time for the main event. We got the champion Stipe Miocic defending his title once again against Francis Ngannou for the second time, and I'm really looking forward to this fight to see if there's been improvements made on either side. I think there have been improvements on one side, but not so much on the other, at least that we've been able to see inside the cage. So we got minus 120 for Francis Ngannou. Just a reminder, he was minus 170 the first time they were scheduled to go up against each other, and we got the return on Stipe Miocic at plus 100 at this point in time. I think the best line you can currently get is at Pinnacle at plus 107, at least at the time of this recording. So let's start off on the champion side. So he fought Francis Ngannou and then goes out there and has a trilogy with Daniel Cormier back to back, where he's literally just going, he loses to Daniel Cormier at UFC 226, wins the title back at UFC 241, and then defends the title once again at UFC 252. And we see a different type of style in every single fight, right? First round, you see him go out there and get knocked out in the first round. Then the second fight, you see him going out there and just getting out-volumed. And, DC was playing a very sketchy game where you're just staying in front of his face and not really using his wrestling too much, kind of just out-pointing him, outboxing him and just continuously going to the face. And then you see Stipe, I think somewhere in the third or fourth round, he really just has this light bulb moment where he's like, let me just start digging to the body. And he does exactly that, and then he goes out there and eventually gets the finish over Daniel Cormier in the fourth round. So beautiful adjustment there from the championship adjustment, if I should say so myself. But very good performance from Stipe to get his title back. And then obviously the third fight goes all 5 rounds. DC has a decent first round, gets that on the judges' scorecards, and then the next 4 is just all Stipe. Stipe is doing a good job with his boxing, tying him up against the cage and having some good dirty boxing moments, and just really not letting DC get his game going. He was just really outstriking him. His boxing looks crisp. His movement looked good. And yeah, he was really tagging DC with a lot of shots, and DC couldn't just seem to get his game going. And I believe in the third round, he gets this really bad eye poke at the end of the round, and it definitely affects him for the next 2 rounds where he's not able to see out of that eye. And, Miocic is just lighting him up on that side of his face. Not saying if, he hadn't gotten hit in his eye and poked in his eye that he would come back and win that fight. Stipe was definitely taking over there, and he did everything necessary to get his hand raised that night. But let's go back to the first fight in Stipe and Ngannou, right? Nobody expected it to go 5 rounds. It goes 5 rounds. We have an action-packed first round where, Stipe lands big shots and Francis lands big shots, and Stipe makes it clear right off the bat that he wants to grapple in this fight. He doesn't want to stand with the power of Francis. Then again, who does, right? You're asking for trouble if you think that Stipe is just going to stand there with you and hope that he's going to go punch for punch with you. That's just not going to happen. We got to credit Stipe, though. There was a lot of instances in that fight where he got clipped big and he still managed to keep chugging forward and moving forward. So I like the fact that he was able to take those shots and, really put it on Francis for the rest of that fight. A couple of good things that we saw from Stipe in that fight. A lot of great head movement, right? You see Francis punching out a bunch of air for the majority of that fight, and then Stipe was just finding the proper time for the entries to push him up against the cage, drag him to the ground, and the cardio really seemed to catch up to Francis in that second round, and then obviously third, fourth, and fifth round as well. Another small detail that Stipe did very well in that fight was when he did shoot, he shot onto the opposite side of the power hand of Francis. So whenever Francis was, winging and ready to get ready for that shot, it was coming from his power hand. But you see Stipe fade off to the other side and go towards his weak hand, and you see him kind of like just ever so slightly clipped Stipe, but it wasn't with the most force, which allowed Stipe to complete his takedowns and get in on the hips of Francis. It's those small little details that you need to be, mindful of whenever you're fighting a heavy hitter like Francis Ngannou, where your margin of error needs to be very, very small. Otherwise, you're going to be staring up at the lights. I think Stipe actually has gotten better since that fight. We've seen him go out there and adjust on the fly against Daniel Cormier, go out there and beat Cormier over 5 rounds in a very methodical fight, and his cardio looked great in all of those fights. His cardio just did not look good in that first fight against Francis, which caused me to really fade him heavily when Daniel Cormier fought him the first time. Obviously, cardio didn't really come into to play there since the fight finished in the first round, but we did see improved cardio from him in the second and third fights, and I believe in this fight against Francis, we'll see that improved cardio again and possibly even get a finish here. Now, I think we'll see him go out there and really get his game going and stay away from the big shots of Francis. Because what have we really seen from Francis to this point in time to make us believe that he's made changes as a fighter and gotten better as a fighter? Sure, his approach in terms of fighting must have gotten different, right? Like he moved away from his gym in France, I believe it was, or his guy Ferdinand, I believe his last name is. That was his main head coach in that fight. But now he's gone over to Extreme Couture for the last couple of years, really engulfed himself with Eric Nicksick, and they've, I'm sure they've made some improvements inside the cage or inside the gym that we haven't seen in the cage because he just hasn't been required to showcase it. Right, since losing to Stipe, he had that loss to Derek Lewis, which was just a very unordinary fight for Francis, where we saw him, I think, only land 11 strikes, which is absolutely crazy. But then he knocks out Curtis Blades in 45 seconds, knocks out Cain Velasquez in 26 seconds, knocks out Junior Dos Santos in 1 minute and 11 seconds, and then knocks out Jairzinho Rozenstruik in 20 seconds, close to a year ago. So we don't see those improvements, right? He's just going out there. And the last image that we have of him is his knockout of Jairzinho Rozenstruik, where you see no technique, but just, I'm going to throw these lunch pails that I call fists, and I'm going to try to knock you the fuck out. And that's exactly what he did. Jairzinho even landed a couple strikes, and you see Francis kind of backing up and still trying to throw his winging shots while staying out of the way of Jairzinho's strikes. And, Jairzinho probably should have pivoted off that rather than just moving straight backwards. And he paid for it. And Jairzinho goes down like a sack of potatoes, and we see Francis get his hand raised once again. Stipe was a completely different approach. Whenever we saw that bull rush from Francis, we saw him use his head movement very well, stayed out of the way of the big shots, zigged definitely when he should have zigged, and zagged when he should have zagged. But this time around, it could be, he should have zigged when he zagged, and that could be the end of the night for him. So this is a very tough fight to call in terms of no matter what kind of approach that Stipe brings to this, he can't slip up at all. He can't make any mistakes. And that's what he did in the first fight. He made no mistakes, which is why he played or pitched a perfect fight in that. He was able to stay away from the big shots, land some big shots of his own, and then really start to wear on Francis. But now that he knows what to expect when he's going in there with Francis, I think that we'll see a better game plan from him later in this fight, not just holding Francis down. I think we'll see him actually work for that finish as well. So, again, Francis, this is another thing, another storyline going into this. People are talking about Kamaru Usman's going to be in his corner, so that should be a big thing that we should focus on. If you guys actually watched the tape on the Junior Dos Santos fight, Kamaru Usman was in his corner there too. You saw the same fucking Francis Ngannou. He threw a couple of leg kicks. Oh my God. Now, if he changes those leg kicks up to calf kicks, things can get really interesting, because imagine the power that he's able to generate from his kicks. So if that's the approach that he starts to take with his opponents, then I think people are in trouble. But I don't know if we're going to see that. His grappling. How good can his grappling really get when you got a guy like Miocic who's been grappling for the majority of his life? So it's really tough to tell, what we're going to see from him in that aspect. And then in terms of the cardio, I just don't feel like Francis is a guy that we're going to go out there and see have cardio better than 7.5 minutes, given his style. Like, is he really going to play it patient and wait for his openings and really get it going that way? Or is he going to have that adrenaline dump just as he did in the first fight, where he's just winging these big shots, and then when he's missing and throwing at air, he's going to start huffing and puffing, and we see Stipe start to set up those takedowns again. So I think that Francis's focus on getting the knockout may be his downfall, and I think that's what he thinks he's going to be able to do in this fight. I'd be very surprised to see him go out there and get a knockout. So if you are, a decision victory. So if you are looking to back Francis Ngannou here, do not leave any money on the table. He's not winning this fight by decision. Take the KO prop. Either he wins by KO or he doesn't win at all. And this another thing that I want to bring up regarding about this matchup is it reminds me of two heavyweight fights that we just had recently. Derek Lewis versus Curtis Blades and Cyril Gane versus Jairzinho Rozenstruik, where you got a heavy hitter in both matchups who's more than likely path to victory in those fights are knockouts. And then you got other guys who are very good and very skilled in other aspects of MMA and are very dominant, right? You got Cyril Gane, who's such a great striker, so good with his movement and able to get out of the way of those big shots of his opponents. And then you got Chris Blades, who's such a great wrestler. But it just shows like they're 1-1, right? You got the power puncher that wins one of them, and you get the finesse guy that wins in the other. And this is almost the tiebreaker of seeing if the finesse guy and Stipe Miocic can stay away from the big power of Francis Ngannou and actually get his hand raised. I think that Stipe stays away from it. I don't think that he's slowed down as much as people might make it out to be. I think that he's looked the best he's ever looked in his last couple of fights against the best opponent he's ever faced, in my opinion, who is Daniel Cormier. Skill-wise, Daniel Cormier is the best guy that we've seen Stipe go out there and beat handedly too, right? Twice. He was down pretty big in that second round or that second fight, but then made the adjustments necessary and got the finish. And I can see him doing the same thing here against Francis. I think he gets a third round finish here. I think he stays away from the big power, mixes in his takedowns, continues with the head movement, continues with the smart entries on his takedowns, which is to the weak hand. And we see him go out there and ground and pound Francis probably in that third round. I think the cardio dump that we saw from Stipe as well was more so. He did have a cardio dump just as Francis Ngannou did, and which is why we saw such a slow-paced fight for the third, fourth, and fifth rounds. But I think this time around, I think both guys know what they're going to expect. Francis will blow his wad within a round and a half, I think. If he's not able to get the finish there, we'll see Stipe start to grind him out and probably get a ground and pound finish. I'd say third or fourth round, but I do really like Stipe in this spot. Not 100% sure if I'll be laying money. As you guys already know, I'm taking a very cautious approach to my betting strategy now, which is just a lock that I play, a dog that I play. And with Stipe being a dog, it makes sense that he should be my dog that I play. But there are other plus money spots on this card that I'm going to be looking to target that don't have Francis Ngannou staring across from them. So I'm still taking Stipe. Think he wins this fight, and I'll take him to win by third round TKO. And he retains his title once again and continues his reign as one of the best heavyweight champions that we've ever had in the UFC. And those are the breakdowns. Hope you guys enjoyed them. Hopefully it can translate into some moolah this weekend. And if you guys enjoyed the show, make sure you guys hit that like and subscribe. As well, check out the Patreon. That's the best way to support your boy. $5 a month. You guys get a ton of great talent. And not to mention the fact that I'm doing this thing full-time starting next week. There's going to be a ton more content on there for you guys to indulge in. And a lot more looking ahead and future thoughts on future matchups. And I'm sure you guys will really enjoy it. So like, subscribe, check the Patreon as well. Good luck on your bets this weekend. I'll see you guys throughout the week. We got Thursday propping you up with me and Cody on odds. 9 p.m. Eastern on Friday for the final weigh-in for me and the odds crew. And then Saturday, I'm right back here, 1 p.m. Eastern for a live stream. I believe I'm going to start calling that the Fight Day live chat. I'm not 100% sure yet, but the MMA Lawcast Live now is on Tuesdays. And then Saturday, I'll have to come up with a new name for that show. But 1 p.m. Eastern, I'm not leaving that time slot. That is my time slot on fight days to help you guys get hyped and prepped for the fights that are coming up on that day. All right. See you guys throughout the week. Good luck on your bets. Sayonara.